My guest today is the original designer of the Call of Cthulhu RPG.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Welcome to the show. My name is Matt, and I am your host. This is the podcast where we learn how to become better game masters and role players by filling ourselves with stories and knowledge. All right, guys, today's episode is so awesome. Here it is. My guest today is the game designer behind the original Call of Cthulhu role-playing game. His work also includes the video games Doom and Quake. He is also the founder of Petersen Games. Sandy Petersen. Sandy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, absolutely. It is my pleasure. How did you discover the hobby of tabletop role-playing games way back in the day?
So I've always been a game nut. Like, for example, sometimes in elementary school, I would stay in from recess to play Clue or something. Mm-hmm. Well, I started playing more complicated games, mostly Avalon Hill war games in my high school years. And then when I was in my first year of college, a friend of mine who we gamed with said, "Hey, there's this new game called Dungeons and Dragons." This is 1974.
Wow.
Okay, December 1974. So it is like really soon after D&D came out.
Yeah.
And he described it to me and it sounded really dumb, but eventually I decided to play it. And I'd actually on my own moved a little bit towards it. Like the way that D&D first came about is they started naming their characters in their Napoleonic tabletop miniatures games and having them promoted. So I was actually doing that with my miniatures games that I played with my friends. We'd have a guy that was us and they'd get promoted. But I'm not saying I would have come up with roleplay on my own, but it's interesting that my mind was in some of the same areas. Anyway, so we get the D&D, we didn't even have a copy. We borrowed it from a teacher at our college. And it was great. And we kept it for a couple months until we could order our own at the vastly expensive sum of $10. I mean, that was unthinkable. We got it. And then for the first few months, we didn't have dice because you couldn't get wacky dice anywhere. Yeah. So we literally used chits from other games numbered 1 through 20. And we would draw these out of our pocket to get the random numbers. Mm-hmm. Eventually we ordered the dice. And if you've ever seen pictures of the first dice that you got, it was actually from a mathematical company. They were just terrible dice. They're all oblong and the numbers rubbed off. But hey, so we played D&D and it was cool. I did most of the game mastery, not all.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. That's where I got my chops.
Yeah.
Well, you might be aware that in fact, the magic system in the original D&D was very unclear. So, as was the combat system. So we tried to figure out a magic system that would work, and I'm the only group I knew that actually randomly hit upon the system that Gary Gygax intended it to be. So we actually were playing the magic system right. No one else I knew did that. But our combat system was completely different. So,
okay,
because it gave you two combat systems to use this one or the one in chainmail. So we looked up chainmail and it was anyway. Okay. So we played D&D. I played D&D since 1974 up to 1978 when we played other games as well as D&D.
Yeah. And
what we usually do, we start off, we find some new game like the Fantasy Trip or Traveler. We play like half D&D, half that game. Then after a few months, we get sick of the other game and go back to D&D. 1978, we came across the game RuneQuest. And we started playing that along with D&D. And then RuneQuest took over and we just played that.
Okay. I did want to follow up on a couple of things. You said when your friend described it to you, you thought it was dumb. Why did you think it was dumb?
Well, I mean, why was just playing games with like tanks and soldiers and airplanes and Civil War guys? Mm-hmm. And he was describing a game where like you're one dude and you go into a dungeon. Mm-hmm. I mean, thinking a dungeon is like people in cells, shackles on the walls. I mean, that's, and then you fight monsters underground and someone has to make a map and it's like, you're only one guy, there's no counters. And I couldn't really, the initial description wasn't very clear to me how it was supposed to be. But of course, playing it once, it was like, oh, now I see.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Remember, no one had ever done anything like it. It was.
Yeah. 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 That was, it was a new type of game, right? It was just
a new type of game.
Yeah.
And I said, this is the kind of game never existed before, and I think it will be big.
Yeah.
And it was.
It's
affected video games and pop culture and everything. It's huge. Yeah. Everyone's heard about D&D. Even if they don't play it, most people don't play it. Well, maybe not everyone, but a lot of people have heard about D&D.
Yeah.
Everyone in America, certainly. And almost everyone that's played D&D has heard about Call of Cthulhu. So that's kind of cool too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, now you said though that when you first started, like you pretty much became the game master. Why was that?
I'm not sure. I mean, I started doing dungeons, and I guess my dungeons were the biggest, the most interesting.
Oh, okay.
I mean, maybe it was my latent game design chops showing up for the first time. I don't know. But the players seem to like my dungeons and like my campaigns, and so I mostly game mastered.
Okay.
I played too. I didn't game master exclusively.
Okay.
But for the last 40 years, I've game mastered almost exclusively, because now I'm official game designer. So whenever I get in a game with someone, they're like, well, you're the game designer, so you should run it. So, very rare I get to play.
Okay. Does that bother you, or do you love just running games? I'm
used to it, but it's 40 years, right? It's the way it is. Although I will say that my gaming group is now running a game in which I get to be a player. So I'm excited, but
oh, nice.
It's on hiatus right now because I'm off on vacation and stuff, but we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
In previous times when people have brought me in as a player after I've been a game master a long time, I find myself inadvertently trying to torpedo the other players' plans to make the game more interesting. That's like I'm still thinking like a game designer instead of a player.
Yeah.
So,
no, that's interesting. Yeah, and I kind of was the forever GM for like 20, 25 years. And then I've been taking a break a bit, but just the other night I ran my first session probably in about a year or so. And it was a lot of fun. But so many people are wanting to, we played Dungeons and Dragons 5e, and so many people are wanting to play right now that it's fairly easy for somebody in our gaming group just to step up and want to play, because so many people are wanting to play. We're like in a second golden age or something of tabletop role-playing games, I think. Yeah. Well,
I mean, during Zoom, it was during the disease apocalypse, Zoom was you could still role play.
Yeah.
It's still not quite as good as face-to-face where you can see them wince or,
Yeah, or pick up little slight clues at the table or something like that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm very sensitive to that. Any game master don't like that. You look and you know just which guy needs to be ambushed by the monster.
Yeah, absolutely. And then since I'm thinking since you discovered tabletop role playing games a few months after they were created, and you were already in college, I assume that being like a game designer was not on your radar at that point.
Well, of course not. I didn't actually become a game designer until yes, Amelia. Okay. Well, what happened is that I eventually, at a friend's behest, I eventually contacted Chaosium, the company that did RuneQuest, and I was talking to them about doing things for them. So I produced a thing called the Gateway Bestiary, which is a whole bunch of monsters, one group of which were Lovecraft monsters because I like them. And then I did other things. I did some cults and stuff for RuneQuest. And then they told me I proposed a RuneQuest expansion based on Lovecraft's Dreamlands, and they said they weren't interested because they were already doing a full-on Lovecraft game based in the modern world. So I got super excited and wanted to know more about it, and then they dropped the whole thing in my lap. They said, well, the guy that's doing it, later they told me they gave it to me because they knew I was a big Lovecraft fan and do it right. I never missed a deadline, and I was excited to do it. So I did Call of Cthulhu. It wrote it in 1980, and all this time I'm going to college, right? And graduating. 1981, it's shipped, and then I went to California for graduate school, and I needed a job to support myself and my wife and daughter. So tiny daughter, right? A 1-year-old. And so I got a job as typesetter for Chaosium, and I gradually became typesetter and designer and editor. And then my avocation of games gradually got more and more interesting to me, and my college classes got less and less. And finally, I just dropped out of college, dropped out of graduate school, and went to a full-time game designer for Chaosium, which is not a career path I necessarily recommend to anyone. So in the long run, it worked for me.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's fascinating. So what sparked your love of Lovecraft?
When I was 8 years old, we had just moved to Utah, and we were in a temporary house. We were in that temporary house 3 years, so whatever. And my dad, who'd been a science fiction fan since the 1940s, had a whole bunch of his science fiction books in these huge boxes in the basement. So when I wanted to read something, I would sneak into the basement and look through the boxes and find something cool to read. Usually something short, because I was 8, Mm-hmm. But one day I found this book called, I think, The Dunwich Horror and Other Stories. Mm-hmm. And it was a 1942 Armed Services collection of Lovecraft stories. Mm-hmm. And so I opened it up and I went to the shortest story, which was Pickman's Model, and read it, and it blew me away. And I was this is a really good story. I like creepy things even then. Then I read The Outsider and was super impressed by that. And then I actually decided I was going to read all the stories, and I did. And then I couldn't find any more Lovecraft for years. And eventually, when I was 14, I found out that the local college had some Lovecraft books. So I went and would check them out all the time. And I could tell it was only me because I could see the card in the back of the book, yeah. Right? But I check them out every once in a while and read them. And so I got to read a lot of more Lovecraft stuff, because I was really curious about some stories that were referenced in the 1942 book that weren't in the book. Like they talk about the thing on the doorstep, which sounded pretty interesting, but it wasn't in the book. So then the college found out that their first edition Arkham House Lovecraft books were actually really valuable. So they locked them away so teenagers couldn't take them out anymore. But then when I was 17, my dad took me on a trip to New York, and that was the year that Ballantine came out with the paperback collection of Lovecraft. So I was able to buy them all. And then we're in New York, and I spent the whole time in the hotel room reading Lovecraft. But but and that was it. Then I finally had Lovecraft. So my search for all Lovecraft stories took like 9 years to get it. So it was almost like trying to find one of those ancient horrible books in Lovecraft stories, which probably helped fixate me on Lovecraft up until even up until the time that I wrote the Call of Cthulhu game. Every single person I knew who had heard about Lovecraft had heard about him because I had told them. So I was like the only Lovecraft guy that I knew. I mean, Chaosium had heard about him, but they didn't read him, actually. They just thought it was a good license. Uh-huh. So yeah,
that's interesting.
But since then I thought that Call of Cthulhu would be a obscure cult game for the few thousand of us that read Lovecraft, which I assumed there was others besides me, and then it would go away. But I'd have done this cool game, but obviously that's not what happened. Yeah, and I've heard from so many people over the years that they got into Lovecraft because of my game. So at least I do know that the sales of Call of Cthulhu helped Arkham House do the ST Yoshi editions of Lovecraft stuff. So that was good too.
Oh, nice. Now, when you started designing the game, I'm just trying to wonder what was kind of your thought process? What were you trying to accomplish with the game? And how did you set about to create the feeling of Lovecraft in rules to a game? Like, what were some of your thoughts there?
Well, the system I used turned out to be the system I use on basically all my games, which is a lot of designers do a game system first, then fit it into their theme. Mm-hmm. But I always do the theme first and try to get the game to match the theme. So with Call of Cthulhu, first off, it was very contrarian. Every other role-playing game, you are a heroic guy who goes out and kills bad guys and gets loot and then levels up, and then kills bad guys and gets loot and it's a very compelling thing. You go in this little cycle of leveling up, killing, leveling up, fighting, like that. Mm-hmm. And I knew that couldn't be the case for a Lovecraft game because all the monsters are so horrific that killing monsters has to not be the goal. You have to be afraid of the monsters. I mean, sometimes you have to fight them, but they have to be terrifying. So I made the monsters terrifying. The game system I used was the Chaosium, a basic role-playing system based off RuneQuest, because that was what they told me to use. But it worked good for me because one of the advantages of RuneQuest is that your hit points don't go up over time, like in D&D. So a guy in D&D can just shrug off a hit from a monster, but a guy in RuneQuest has to like use skills or brains to avoid them, which I liked. The first thing I had to do is I had to figure out a substitute for combat, because I couldn't have combat be the be all and end all. So what I thought it would be based on Lovecraft is investigation, where you'd be looking up things, you'd use libraries, you'd find out ancient clues, you'd go into, and also it would impel you to have to go into spooky places to find out things. And, which I thought was an effective thing. You didn't get better over time. You generally got worse because you had the sanity score. Your big reward from a game is a moldy old book that drives you insane by looking at the pictures, So it's a different kind of game, and it obviously appeals to different kinds of players. But the good news is that if you want something different from the regular game cycle, then it's kind of the only game in town. Call of Cthulhu has this weird stuff. Like the other companies that tried to do horror games like Chill or stuff, they went back to the old kill them, get treasure, level up kind of thing. And I never did that. I also wanted you to feel alone and helpless. So I didn't have some kind of government agency or overarching group that funded and let you do things, which a lot of other games have done. You just like, it's just you and your buddies, and there's no one there to help. Now, one of the things I did I was trying to figure out how to have sanity in the game, because Lovecraft guys would like swoon away when they saw a monster or panic and run off, but I wanted that effect. So the sanity system was put together, and I remember the very first time I tried it, I was playtesting the game in California, and they knew how the sanity system worked, and they were in the basement of this haunted house, and they thought that the haunting was summoned by this spell they'd found, which it wasn't, but whatever, right? And so they said, "What's the spell?" I said, "Summon malign entity from beyond." It was actually a dimensional shambler spell. I didn't tell them that. So they're casting the spell, and I'm trying to make it spooky, and I say, "Oh, there's a weird rippling in the air, and something seems to open, and something's coming through. You see a clawed hand." And then the players did something completely unexpected. One of the players said, "I'm running up the stairs away." Another one said, "I'm covering my eyes." Another said, "I'm going to the corner, turning my back to it." And I was shocked, because you would never do that in D&D.
Yeah.
You'd always want to see the monster. But the players, I'm not saying the players were scared, but their characters were acting as if they were scared. And until that moment, I hadn't really realized that would be the effect of the sanity rules. I had thought the sanity rules would just be like an additional weapon for the monsters. Really scary monsters have another thing they can do to you. But instead, it made players act scared. And of course, if you act scared, eventually it's more effective. So then that's when I knew that somehow I'd come up with something really powerful for Call of Cthulhu. Then from then on, it was pretty much smooth sailing, because if the game master has power over that, he's like, anytime he wants, he can like, "Oh, it's really creepy." And the players are like, "Uh-oh," sand rolls ahead, and then they like are really careful. So I think a combination of the investigation aspect instead of combat and the sanity rules are what made Call of Cthulhu really stand out.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said a number of things there, so I want to follow up on a few things. One, really quickly, you said that sometimes the theme influences the system, and I find that that's very true, and I struggle to figure out exactly why, but it always seems interesting when I come across like a generic, system, that it almost seems like there are games where the setting influences the system, and those feel better than just having a generic, RPG system sometimes. And I'm not sure exactly why that is, but like some examples that I know of is just like the Star Wars West End 6D system seemed to fit Star Wars very well, whereas it seems sometimes Star Wars struggles.
They got that system from me, right? It's based on my Ghostbusters game.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's a great system, so I'm happy to see it going on.
Yeah. But I mean, it's just interesting that it fits the system. That sometimes the setting will dictate the system, and I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, if you have a generic system, sometimes it just doesn't work. Like, it feels like you kind of force a setting into it, and I'm not sure why that is, but I just feel that's just an interesting thing.
I mean, some designer like Reiner Knizia makes an interesting game, and then he like throws the theme all around it to paint it. Mm-hmm. And that works for his games, I guess. But when I do a game, I try, like I said, I like, how can I feel? I want to, because when I'm playing Call of Cthulhu, I want to feel like I am in a horror movie or a horror story. Mm-hmm. You know, not that I'm playing a game with horror elements. So that's what I did. When I did Cthulhu Wars, instead of like figuring out a basic game system, I said, what would Shub-Niggurath's cult do? And I said, oh, they'd be interested in spreading. They would have Dark Young. And I did that first. I actually made creature faction abilities before I did the game system, which is kind of whack, but it worked in a sense, because Call of Cthulhu Cthulhu Wars has come to be one of the most well-known asymmetrical games, because the factions feel nothing alike, and it all became out of trying to pour theme into it first. I guess. I mean, I'm not saying there's not other ways. It's not like there's one true way of doing games, but all I know is this is my way, because I come at it first. I think cinematically, you know. So when I'm designing a scenario for Call of Cthulhu, I'll think of a scene from a movie or a story or something that I kind of want to have happen in that, and then I'll try to arrange things so that scene takes place, or a simulation of it. And so it's like I'm trying to get into that point, you know. Yeah. Anyway, I want players to feel. I don't know how to say it. I guess I've said it enough.
No, that's all right. I just wanted to follow up on a couple things still, because you talked about the investigation aspect, and I think sometimes, I know I struggled with this when I was, really starting to game master, and I'll be kind to myself and say when I was starting to game master, because I did some of these for a long time, but some of these mistakes, if I tried to have my players do an investigation, sometimes what I would do is I would make them roll, and then they wouldn't find the clues. And I didn't really, and then I would realize that the story would just die. And so maybe you can kind of help us and help the listeners. How would you run a really good investigation system with, so players are finding clues kind of on the regular, so that the story keeps moving forward?
Okay. So first off, I will confess that the investigation places a huge burden on the keeper of a Call of Cthulhu game, because he has to come up with clues that are interesting to find. It's not always so easy to do on the fly. I mean, I can do it on the fly now. I'm sure you can too. Yeah. But so what I do, there's a couple of different ways. If a player is searching for something and I need them to find it and they fail their rolls, then I let them. I make it clear that what they found is a lesser version of what they're really looking for. Okay, they didn't find nothing, because the papers are still there on the desk. It's just like they didn't find the secret drawer. So the players feel that they could have done better. Sometimes I will literally have clues that they don't have to search for. They get a call from the hospital that someone is raving and asking for them. And they go there, and that guy gives them clues. So I will hand away clues sometimes. I will say, you find this, and then I say, and now if you make your search roll, you can find even more stuff. And that way they have the basics they need to move ahead without being handicapped. And then if there's something really critical that I needed them to make the roll for, I have it be like keep cropping up. They can try other rolls, and they don't know that the roll they just recently made is the one that got them the thing they should have had at the start. They just, they got it. Okay. Also, I let them ponder things on their own. I don't drag them by the nose, but if they have just killed a cultist and I needed them to know that the cultists are Cthulhu guys, then like if they examine the body without even making a roll, I can see, oh, he's got a weird octopus-like sigil tattooed on his chest. And then if they make a roll, they say, oh, it's the Cthulhu cult, but they can probably figure it out anyway, but they feel cool if they made the roll, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The whole game is about the players enjoying themselves and being creeped out, not about me trying to deny them stuff. I'm not trying to hold secrets from them, right? The whole point of making up secrets for them to find is so they can find them and feel clever.
Yeah.
Also, if I have other ways they can do it, sometimes I'll have them, if they do certain actions, they can find it. Like they'll say, this room seems too small compared to the outside. Let's look really hard for a secret door. They fail the secret door check, but I say that wall sounds hollow. They didn't find the secret door, but they know something's up, so they break through with a sledgehammer, and then, they're eaten by the Shoggoth or whatever. But they feel smart because they figured something out.
Yeah.
And when players feel smart, they want to play with you more instead of less.
Yeah.
As a video game designer, one of the first things I discovered is that you always want a player who fails in a game, which of course players fail in video games all the time. You want them to feel that the failure was somehow their fault and never the fault of the game. Right? I mean, you've played games where you missed a jump by 1 pixel and the game designer sucks, right?
Yeah.
But you've also played games where you missed a jump and you thought, I could have done it if I did this right. And then you try again and again until finally you get it right. That's what I want people to feel. I don't want them to say this game sucks and put it away. I want them to say, I almost did it, and then try again. So that's also the case for Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting.
Or
and
sometimes if they didn't get the clue, another thing I'll do is if they didn't get the proper clue, it turns out that the clue would have told them that they're about to be attacked by a Byaki or something. Instead, in other words, they're avoiding a bad thing instead of finding something to pull them in deeper. And of course, the bad thing, if they're attacked by a Byaki, that might be a pretty big clue in itself as to what's going on.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. And I do always, I remember one kind of example in my, back in the day, and you mentioned it a little bit, the secret drawer, because that always seems very, I don't know. Like I said, I've done it wrong where I'm like, well, you didn't ask if you were looking for a certain drawer. And so I didn't give them a clue. But like, if they roll a certain way now, of course, I realize that I should say, well, you see, you're looking in the drawer and you see that there are scratch marks around the bottom of the drawer or something like that. And they're like, ooh, maybe that bottom of that drawer comes out. And so I have plenty of examples of where I've done things wrong in my years of game mastering, but I always seem to come up against the secret drawer, and nobody ever, once every 3 years somebody's like, I check it to see if there's anything secret in the desk, and it's like, well
what I usually do with a secret drawer kind of thing, or other aptatory, aptatory being an awesome word that means a secret hiding place for something small, is I will if they say I'm looking for a secret drawer, I will let them find it.
Yes.
And if they say I'm searching the desk, then they make a die roll to see if they find the secret door.
Yeah.
Which also is a clue in itself, because they know there was something there to find.
Yeah.
And you pretty much always, even if they're searching somewhere where there's nothing to find, if they make a success, I will give them some kind of clue. Like they're searching the wallpaper for a clue, and of course, like the wallpaper has nothing, but they find on the back of some of the wallpaper, they peel off a number, like some kind of code number. So, it's a password or something. And then they start looking for something that needs a password because they made their search roll. So I had to, on the fly, I made up something useful for them to find, but not directly readable. They can tell the wall's done, right? There's nothing else in the wall. There's no secret panels, but they found this password. What could use a password? Let's find out. And then it could be a password to get into the speakeasy downtown, or if it's modern days, onto the, whatever it is, right? It gives them something interesting to work with.
Yeah.
Again, even the fact that there is a password is something kind of interesting. Let's see.
Yeah. No, and actually I've done that as well, where if somebody comes up with a cool idea and they say, yeah, I want to search this wallpaper. You in your description, you mentioned that the wallpaper was like falling off the walls. I want to peel some back and see if something's there. Well, then even if it wasn't in my mind, I'm going to put something there because the player had a cool idea. Any cool idea by the players, I reward, instead of thinking, well, I didn't say there was something in the pond out back, so they don't get anything. There's going to be something in the pond out back in that case, right? Yeah. Also, I will as I see it, there's kind of three types of game masters, and these are not necessarily good or bad. So for example, the example is this: a player says, well, without knowing it exists, he says, I'm going to go to the Chinese place across the street for some food. And one game master will say, I never said there was a Chinese place across the street. Another game master will say, well, actually it's an Indian place. The third game master will say, okay, now there's a Chinese place across the street. So I am usually the kind that says, okay, but sometimes to keep the players on their toes, I will say, no, it's an Indian place, because that way they aren't sure if it actually is relevant that there is not a Chinese place. Yeah.
And if they go to search the Chinese plate or the Indian plate, and then sometimes serendipitous things will happen. Like they find out that there is some kind of connection to India, and then there's an Indian place across the street, and they start searching that place that I hadn't even known of before they mentioned it. So I got to throw things into the Indian place because obviously they're cultists. So that works too.
Yeah, no, that's really fascinating. And I think there's a lot of different ways that game masters can approach some of those. Yeah, I'm usually in the last two kind of camps as well. Yeah. It's just usually I'll just be like, somebody's like, there's an inn, can I go to the inn that's down the road? And you're like, I didn't even think of an inn down the road. Sure, you can go to the inn. Of course there's an inn down the road. Yeah. And then, and then if they say, oh, well, it's like this, then I'm, it's like, oh, well, the innkeeper's an old friend of mine. Then I might say something like, I don't think so. Yeah, you've known him for a long time, but the last time you left, he wasn't happy with you. Or I'll add a little conflict. My players will probably ask something like, do I know anyone in town? And I'll say, oh yeah, the innkeeper or whatever. Right. And then they know there's right. But it's you have to make sure that sometimes the players have to know that there's things that you actually have planned ahead, so they're suspicious. Also, a lot of this depends on the players, right? My players are pretty self-motivated. I mean, they've been gaming with me since 1993, right? So we all know each other super well, 30 years of gaming kind of does that. So I found sometimes like I don't need to inspire them to go try things because they will do it. Whereas when I play at conventions, quite often I'll have players kind of waiting to see what clue I give, how I tell them where they should go. And I'm like, whatever. They would say, well, what should we do? And I say, I don't know, you could call a cab, you could go rent a car, and they go, a car, something about a car. And I'm just like, you just said you wanted to get to the place. I guess you could take the train. They go, a train, we'll take the train. And they think I'm trying to lead them, and I'm not, Now, with my players, they would say, when's the next train to Boston? And I would say, well, it's 15 minutes. You barely have time to get there. And then if I wanted to have something on the way, there'd be an encounter on the train. Or if they rented a car, there'd be an encounter in the car. If they got an Uber, the driver of the Uber would be like someone bad. But it wouldn't matter what they did. They're going to have the encounter however they go, right? So sometimes the fact that my players have been playing with you a long time, we all know each other, and I know what they're going to do in a lot of situations, though they still surprise me, is handicap me when I play with new guys that are used to a different, more authoritarian game master style. Yeah, absolutely. And also, though, I think, and I mean, this could be a transition as well, since you mentioned your video game work. I think some people who may come into the hobby from, playing a lot of video games might be used to the aspect that, if you're in an open world game and you walk down the street and there's, just people and shops, in the video game, you're not going to be able to talk to 9 out of the 10 people, but the one person you can talk to, well, now you need to interact with that person. Or you walk down a street in an open world video game and you can't walk into 20 doors, but then you walk into the 21st door and you're like, oh, well, now I need to be here. And I think maybe some people are influenced by that, but that would be interesting to know your thoughts, since you've obviously worked on some very successsul video games as well. That's true. Though I have not, what I would do is, the thing is, I don't want there's two things I try to avoid. I try to avoid NPCs talking to other NPCs because that's the game master kind of masturbating, So if I have two NPCs talking, unless it's something the players are eavesdropping on, I just sum it up. It says, well, the innkeeper says to the drunk that came in with you to get out, or he'll call the cops, instead of doing the interaction. The other thing that I try to avoid is I won't have, if the players are doing a bunch of boring things, like they say, we're going to interview everyone in the bar, then I will skip ahead to the guy in the bar that has something good to say. I won't do all the interviews. Yeah. I'll say, okay, the fifth guy you get in the corner,
like starts talking to you and then blood pours out of his nose and he falls unconscious, or whatever it is that I want him to do, right? That's also a useful way to have a guy give, because one of my things that players tend to do is they find someone with information and then they grill that guy for more and more and more information. So you always have to have some way to cut the conversation short so they don't learn too much from this guy. So being drunk and falling unconscious, being terrified by something he sees, find out the guy doesn't really know much, he just knows a little bit. That's all useful. Because if you read a story or a guy where the guy gets clues, he always gets that like these half-assed clues that he barely gets enough to go to the next stage. So, but the players are like, well, what color was his hair? Does he wear a necktie? So you have to make sure to have some way of cutting that short. But again, you can skip over the boring stuff. So like if even in D&D, they said you're traveling for a week to this new city. I don't roll for an encounter on every day. I figure they're going to have an encounter on the road. And then I just, make something up or roll if I'm lazy. But
no, absolutely. I think
life's too short to do the boring part.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I remember sessions that were like just taking up no matter what setting we were playing in, just with shopping. It's like, oh, I want to buy gear, and they all want to haggle with everybody or something. So it's just like, so I usually now just be like, all right, get all your stuff, and I'm going to run and go grab another drink or something, and I'll be back in 5 minutes, and your shopping will be done in 5 minutes.
And you to succeed on your barter roll, get 20% off.
Yes, or something like that. Yeah, just give them a little something and say, okay, I'm going to go grab a drink, and then shopping will be done, because I can't tell you, especially there were times when we had limited time to play and it was all squandered on shopping, when you could just look in the list and buy something or make a quick roll and get a 10% discount.
Now, an advantage of Call of Cthulhu, because it's modern age, someone says, oh, I need a gun. I say, oh, yeah, you got your grandfather's gun back at the house.
Yeah.
Right. Instead of bothering with them going to find a gun store and whatever they have to do, it's like, sure, get your grandpa's gun.
Yeah.
And
no, that's a good one.
And they say, what is it? And I'm trying to think of what would be right for the adventure. And so it might be a shotgun, might be a pistol, an old cowboy pistol. It doesn't matter. Something interesting,
Yeah. Springfield 03 rifle or something. Yeah.
It's an ancient blunderbuss.
Yes, there you go.
Punch if they're within 20 feet.
Yes, your grandfather hunted ducks, many ducks at one time. Yes.
You got a duck gun.
Yeah. Yes.
It takes two of you to carry the thing, but
yes. Yeah,
but he brought back a Mauser as a trophy from World War II.
Yes, there you go. Yes,
World War I. Yeah. So you can do things without making them buy stuff. Or say we need a car, and I'll say, well, this guy owns a car because he's a dilettante. Obviously, he has a car.
Yeah, absolutely. I think stuff like that is a lot of times underrated.
In D&D, there's more equipment lists you have to do, so you have to do some time shopping. But it's like you said, it's easy to go take a pee break while they do the shopping.
Yeah. And, yeah. No, absolutely.
You can make them get me my drinks, but
there you go. Yes, I'm doing such hard work. I need you to get me the drink or whatever. But that's awesome.
Well, they always come with drinks and snacks. In fact, the first part of the thing is one of our own group things is that we go to the Chinese or Mexican market and buy like whack snacks and then see if anyone will eat them.
Yeah, well, that's the other downside of playing online. No
snacks.
Yeah,
only your own snacks. Never a surprise.
Yeah, exactly. The player who really doesn't know how to use his character can't make up for it by bringing a whole bunch of Doritos or nice snacks or anything. Yeah. But yes, I'm getting
super awesome. I'll give him a bonus, like an inspiration token or something.
There you go.
Know about those from Seth Skorkowski. It's a great idea for any role-playing game.
Yes.
If you do something the game master likes, he gives you basically a coin or a poker chip or something. That's your inspiration token. Then you can spend it during the game for one inspiration, which is obviously super useful in Call of Cthulhu.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can't have more than one, so no point in hanging on to it.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to do something really awesome to get one. So
yeah, no.
And I actually mean bringing snacks. It's like they have a brilliant idea in the game. They do something super courageous that could have got them killed. Whatever it is, they get inspiration. So it's a really useful way for game masters to encourage role playing and also to reward players in a way that also benefits the game master. Because it lets a guy maybe not be killed when he would have been when it's inconvenient or, get that clue. So
yeah, absolutely. And now
I don't know if you watched Seth's channel, but Seth actually lives in the same Dallas area as I do, and we're buddies. We get together in a game and stuff. So, but his channel is I think one of the best channels for Call of Cthulhu game mastering. I also have a channel called Sandy of Cthulhu, and I have there's 4 playlists in it. One of them is gaming practicum, and I have a lot of things in there about how to game master, like 3 ways to make your Call of Cthulhu game scarier, game master challenges, cowardly PCs, or calling in the authorities, things like that. So.
Oh, nice. And maybe just for the listeners who missed it, who is Seth and what's his channel? Maybe just give him a shout out.
Seth Skorkowski is a game master of Call of Cthulhu who has a channel called Seth Skorkowski, and it's a bunch of videos about playing games, mostly Call of Cthulhu.
Okay.
He does reviews of Call of Cthulhu adventures. He gives advice on how to run it. He talks about problem PCs and in more generic ways and problem. He's like he has a great video on how to run a heist adventure. Nice. And the structure of it, that kind of thing. So his videos are longer than mine. Mine are usually 10 minutes, 5 minutes tops, but they're very informative. And all the characters in this gaming table are him in different costumes, so that's kind of entertaining.
Nice. Okay. Well,
but of course, I want to plug Sandy of Cthulhu more than that.
Yeah, sure.
But Sandy of Cthulhu has a lot of things going for it because it has. There's 4 different categories of things I do. There's the gaming practicum. There's science speculations, which are sometimes useful. There's horror stuff where I talk about how big is Cthulhu. And I work it out from the clues we're given. And actually, super conveniently, it turns out that from what Lovecraft says, and the evidences from the ship that he's near, is that Cthulhu is about the same size to a person as a normal adult male is to a 28 millimeter scale figure. Oh. And that was really handy, I thought. Yeah. Here's Cthulhu, it's me, and there's your figure on the table, that's you. And they're like, got it. Guess we're not shooting the shotgun at him.
Yeah.
Especially it's useful. He would actually be a rather corpulent human-sized person. So if you're a big fat guy, that's handy too.
Okay. All right. Well,
anyway, there's things like that I found out. It was kind of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure, yes, I will make sure I put a link to Sandy of Cthulhu in the show notes for this episode so people can check out. I also do
videos on scary movies. So there's that.
Oh, nice.
And the idea and the scary movies are where I get a lot of ideas and other scary things, like I recently started a series called, I do things like, here's what the Chotos are like. Here's what the Byaki are like with more information. So you know what to,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And what you were saying earlier about running games, I find it, very helpful. Or when I discovered the idea to think about a session kind of like a movie or a TV show, and that way you're going to cut out all the boring stuff, right? Like exactly. I'm going to try to cut out all the boring stuff. Yeah.
I've heard a person once complain, I've more than once say, how come no one ever goes to the bathroom in the movie? And it's like, dude, seriously, that's what you want to see?
Exactly.
I want to see him fight Thanos. I don't care how Thor goes to the bathroom.
Yeah, absolutely.
Skip over the boring stuff.
Yeah, or go shopping unless it's highly relevant to something that happens later in the the movie, right?
Yeah, exactly. If, for example, in Call of Cthulhu, even though there's prices, I would just figure you can buy anything reasonable that you want. Mm-hmm. There was a game that came out in the 80s, which had a really awesome idea, which is one of the stats it was for ancient Greece, but one of the stats was like your social class. Mm-hmm. And the way it worked for shopping is any item that fit your social class, you could just have.
Yeah.
So like if you were poor, you'd get like a crappy spear. If you were rich, you'd get a sword and a shield, and just like, anything in your social class you own. I always thought that was a useful thing. And especially works in D&D where you're keeping track of your money, it may be not so great. But in Call of Cthulhu, you just say, get equipment you want that's reasonable. If it's kind of unreasonable, we'll have to make a roll to see if you can find it. Like if you want a submachine gun, maybe that's not so easy even in the 20s,
Yeah.
It's on mail order. It'll come in 6 weeks.
Yeah. And I think there are some games that handle it a little different. Some of the Powered by Apocalypse games just basically say you have like a gear stat. And if you're, this far future game and you're in a spaceship, you're like, oh, I need some kind of tool to fix my ship. Well, there's a good chance that you have that. So you can kind of roll against that and see if you just have that automatically, because if you're flying around on a spaceship, you probably have some tools, Even
in D&D, they say I'm paying 200 gold pieces on a bunch of cheap dungeon gear. Then when the dungeon, they say, do I have iron spikes? I say, of course you do. Like cheap dungeon gear, right? Yeah.
Yeah. You have your pack and it's got all this stuff in it. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. Now we are coming down towards the end of time here with our interview, and I definitely want to respect your time. We haven't even got to touch on, as you mentioned, the Ghostbusters role-playing game, your work on Doom and Quake, which we haven't even got to mention hardly at all. And I know you designed some levels for that. Maybe just quickly, before I ask you what you're up to these days, because I know there's a lot of stuff you're into these days. Maybe just really quickly, one question on Doom or Quake. What makes a good level in a game like Doom? What were some of the kind of the elements you were making sure were in a good level like that?
I tried to play to my strengths, which were I wasn't so great at making really interesting architecture, but my levels are often panned for being kind of ugly compared to some of the others, but they're usually respected for having interesting tricks and traps and stuff. One of my rules for my levels is that whenever there's a secret or an ambush coming up, I always give the player clues. For example, one of my classic things is they walk into a room, and on the middle of the room, there's like the BFG 9000, and there is a spotlights on it, and the players know if they pick that thing up, all hell's going to break loose. But they're still going to go do it. But the anticipation of what's going to come is pretty interesting. But the players are signaled, So that's one of the things I like to do. I like to have interesting puzzles players to figure out, interesting traps. I liked to try new things. Like I was the first designer in the group to do an outdoor level. Which John Carmack hated because it was hard on his engine. But it was interesting for players to see the outdoors and walk around and look at the sky box and, be scared by things. So I always try to do interesting things like that. I have a theme. This theme is a lot of the map is underwater. This theme, it's that your route is that it's all about formless spawn jumping at you. And that's what I did.
Okay.
But nice. since that, I mean, I was one of the first people to ever be a level designer back in 1993. We didn't even know to call it a level designer then, right? And since then, the level designers have gotten like far more skilled. I was a pioneer, but the pioneers aren't necessarily the best at doing things now. But I was honored to do that. I did 2/3 of the levels on Doom 1. I did more than half the levels in Doom 2. So a lot of what made this popular was me.
Yeah, well, everybody, the people who come after the pioneers have to build on those blocks, right?
Absolutely.
And so they needed those frameworks to begin. So the pioneers play a great part. So no, that's fascinating. Yeah, and it's really fascinating to hear about some of those.
It's not like a huge ego. I just happened to be there first, right? So yeah.
No, I understand. Well, now. Yeah. And like I said, we are running a little low on time, but I want to definitely ask you, you are very busy and you are working with Petersen Games and you are creating a lot of interesting games. So why don't you give us a little rundown of what you're working on and what people need to find from Sandy Petersen?
Okay, so my company is called Petersen Games. Currently, most of our items are out of stock. We're going to be reprinting them because they're very popular. We're going to be reprinting my game Cthulhu Wars, in which it takes place after the Great Old Ones have come back to Earth, and you are one of those Great Old Ones, battling the other Great Old Ones to rule the ruins of Earth. So that's kind of fun. And you're not just a Great Old, like if you're Cthulhu, you also have like cultists and Starspawn and Shoggoths and stuff. So everyone has their own monsters, very asymmetrical. I have a game coming out in the next few months that is called Hyperspace, which is a space game with alien civilizations fighting. But because Lovecraft's creatures were actually aliens, some, not very, like a fifth of the alien races are Lovecraft ones. So you can be like Star Spawn in space. I also have a game coming out called Call of Cthulhu Terror Paths. This is coming pretty soon, and it is a basically it's a cooperative game where you are Cthulhu investigators going into a scary place like the Silver Twilight Lodge or the Forest of Resurrection or caverns or the ship even. And there's a separate map for the adventure, for multiple adventures. Each adventure is very different. It's not like Arkham Horror is a great game, but it's kind of generic-y in that it's always kind of the same play. But in Terror Pass, each scenario you play is completely different enemies, different rules, different encounters. And it builds on it. We've got some videos up about it, and more are coming, so you can see what's going on. But I'm very proud of Terra Pass. I think it would really appeal to Call of Cthulhu players in particular.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's amazing.
It's being done under Chaosium's license, so because they love me. So,
well, I would hope so. But I mean, that sounds amazing. A lot of awesome games. Where can people find them? So, where should they head on the web to check out some of these games?
I would say just Google Terror Paths game or Cthulhu Wars game or Sandy of Cthulhu on YouTube or Twitter, Petersen Games on YouTube or Twitter. I mean, we try to make there was a Facebook page about Cthulhu Wars in our company, so we try to be easy to find. There is also, of course, the PetersenGames.com, which you can go on and find information about any of our games. Our games are available like on Amazon from suppliers like Miniature Market. So you can, they're out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I will make sure that I put links to your website and to some of the games and your YouTube channel in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. So anybody who is listening right now can head over there and find some of those links and find some of Sandy's games there. Well, Sandy, I could ask you like a million more questions, and I would love to even talk more about, game mastering and running games because it's awesome.
I'm happy to do this again someday when your players when your fans are interested, next year or whenever is good for you.
Yeah, no, that would be awesome. And I will definitely reach out in some months or next year and we'll have to do it again because an hour was just not enough time because I could talk to you for a long time. Well, Sandy, I just thank you so much for your insights into running games and just listening to some of the stories. And thank you so much for coming on the show. So thank you so much.
You bet. Thank you.
All right, there you go, guys. I really hope you enjoyed my conversation with Sandy Petersen today. Oh my goodness, I had so much fun speaking with him. I could have went on for hours and hours longer. I will just have to have him on the show again. But please do yourself a favor. Head over to the show notes at dicegeeks.com. Check out some of the links to Sandy's website, to his RPGs, to his games. You will not be disappointed. There is an amazing array of creative resources and games that you and your gaming group can have years of fun with. So please check out the show notes. If you want some free stuff from me, however, you can head over to dicegeeks.com/free. You'll get some free PDFs. You'll never miss an episode of the show. And I would really appreciate you checking out some of those resources there. If you like this show, please consider rating, reviewing, subscribing, whatever the podcast player you're listening to wants you to do. Those things help the show immensely, and I would appreciate it. Also, if you want to support the show financially, you can do so at patreon.com/dicegeeks. All right, now, guys, until next Wednesday, keep gaming!